Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me tonight is Mr. John Cameron. And John, you love how much I don't talk about Trump, but we're going to have to tonight because the Supreme Court made a decision, and it's got all kinds of people, well, especially left-leaning people, well, Democrats, let's be honest, especially progressives, are all up in arms. They've lost their minds, despite the fact that the court had a 9-0 opinion on this.
Well, you wouldn't know it was 9-0 by reading the press, would you?
No, you would not.
Yeah, yeah, and that's hilarious because it was so cut and dried that there was not one dissent. Everyone agreed. Some people wrote some things in support of the decision, which was 9-0. It wasn't 5-4, folks, even though the progressive press, which is all of the press except for Substack, basically, and National Review and Reason and Heritage and a few others, like 1% of the press, it points out that it's 9-0. It was so, the definition of what are they accusing him of?
Oh, it's the insurrection thing.
Insurrection. The definition of insurrection is pretty clear-cut. You know, basically insurrection is using military power to overthrow an election or to violate the laws of the land. So if you were to apply that to anybody right now, you would probably have to apply it to Joe Biden, who's using the federal government preventing people from upholding laws of the land as relate to a border. But you know, the generals hated Trump, so there's no way, even if he said, hey, can you call out the army and because I want to keep being president, they would say no, and he didn't do that. And he's an idiot, he's a lunatic, he's a liar, he's all the things that the other guy is, but he's just less likable. And trying to prevent him from being on the ballot by saying what happened was an insurrection when he's on record as telling people to go home and not be violent and to obey the law, that's a stretch, man. That's a stretch.
Well, and what I liked about this is they say that the Supreme Court essentially said it's Congress's job to decide if this is an insurrection.
Which it is.
And which clearly in the Constitution, it's the only people who have that. There's only two people who actually have the power to call an insurrection. One's the president, and the other's Congress. That's it. There's two agencies, the president and Congress. And so they're mad that Congress won't do it. They say, well, Congress won't do it. Well, yeah.
It won't because it wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, what he did was stupid.
And insurrection is an actual thing.
Yeah,
right?
insurrection is using armed force to stop the results of an election.
Well, and here's the thing, John. We know since 1812 that even if they had managed to occupy the building, so what? We've known since 1812 that the buildings aren't what create the government. It's not the building. So
if that were the case, it'd be really easy to get rid of these. Just bulldoze the buildings, but that doesn't work because they still have the power that we let them have.
Yeah, so, they'll just go to another office building, bang in a session, and do it out. So this notion that the country was under threat during January 6th is silly. If January 6th was a genuine threat to our country, we deserve to fall, quite frankly, because...
Well, I think it was a genuine threat, but in a way that they don't want to talk about. There's an awful lot of people, and I poo-pooed the idea when it happened that it was a false flag or black flag operation, FBI and CIA. But they had so many agents, FBI agents in that crowd that... I think we're never going to get the footage that shows who opened the doors to let the people in, because again, as I've said on this show a long time ago, those doors are actually designed to stop a tank. You know, all the pounding on it with little flags and poke sticks and all the rest of that isn't going to open the door. You got to push the button. Those doors are heavy and they're big and they're expensive. Somebody pushed a button to open the doors, but surprisingly, with all the cameras we have there, that's the one piece of film that's missing.
Yes,
I'd like to
it's
see
the
who
things we
that
don't
was.
know, right? That
Yeah.
it's the strangeness that we don't
Yeah,
know about.
yeah.
It's
But
like the
I mean,
pipe bomb that happened.
it was
you know?
the point I want to make upon this, and if I haven't done it already because I'm talking around in circles, is that it was a 9-0 decision. The press is trying to make it look like it wasn't a 9-0, that it was a 5-4. The people on the lefties that were put into the Supreme Court didn't like the decision, and they talked around it a lot. But even they realized that under the definition of the 14th Amendment, state governments can't tell the President of the United States that he can't be on the ballot because he's an insurrectionist unless Congress declares him to be an insurrectionist. It's simple.
Yeah, it's a fairly simple thing, and
Yeah.
there's no trial. They just kind of Democrats simply declared it an insurrection without anybody else really agreeing.
What's interesting is the quality of the people, the judges that are and the people making these decisions. Like the latest one was in Illinois. The judge that decided that he couldn't be on the ballot because of the insurrectionist, you know what kind of judge he is? Traffic court. He's a traffic court judge. Yep.
Well, here's my question: if these judges are getting 9-0'd, right? At some point, that theory was flawed, and why are they still a judge? Why is this person? Why are the Supreme Court of Colorado? Why are they? They clearly can't understand and comprehend the Constitution. Why are they judges?
It's awfully hard to get rid of judges. I mean, in one way it's good. You don't want them to just be washed in and out based upon political whim. But on the other side, like Androgen or whatever his name is, that's decided that and he's not a traffic court judge, but I think he's an administrative judge, a very low-level judge. The guy that says that Trump defrauded all these people, because he, being the expert he is in real estate pricing, has decided that all the experts' price that was put on all the real estate properties that Trump used to borrow money was wrong, and his numbers are right. He's a low-level judge too. He's not, he's not like a superior. I don't even know if he's a superior court judge, much less a Supreme Court judge.
Which is actually, on that particular case, that's kind of terrifying that a judge can sit here and determine the value of something rather than the negotiation between a buyer and a seller, or in this particular case, a borrower and the loaner. And it's chilling, quite frankly, where bureaucrats get to decide value of things simply by declaring it. While the bankers who are borrowing money and the person who owns it, how much is my house really worth? Is it worth what I think it's worth? Is it worth what someone's willing to pay for it? Or is it worth what the government says it's worth?
It's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, we're going to move on here. We got there's an article here about there's no escaping as America's lurch towards extremism, and this was out of the Telegraph, if I believe, if I remember, if memory serves me. It was originally from the Telegraph, so it's a British.
From UK, yeah.
From the UK.
They have the benefit of watching us from afar.
Yeah.
And chortling.
And what was interesting is they actually did point out that it wasn't just the right-wing extremism that was existing. The left-wing extremism is growing as well. Now, they poo-pooed it a little bit, but they did point it out that one of the reasons you're getting right-wing extremism is because of left-wing extremism. You're pushing, essentially, a lot of these extremists, be they right or left, are pushing people who used to be in the center one way or the other. And so we're actually creating this goofy society where we can't get along anymore, despite the fact that most of us get along just fine in our daily lives.
Well, most of us, if you asked, I think every time they do a general poll and remove the word libertarian from it and just ask people what they want to see, they want less government, they want more freedom, they want lower taxes, they want less government invasiveness, they want more control over where they can send their kids to school, and on and on and on. And basically 70% of the population or so lines up about 85% libertarian. So what's happened is, like any, we talk about this, extremists end up running political parties. And they might label themselves, like Obama was labeled center-left, but he's basically a self-admitted socialist. And somehow now, despite the fact that socialism hasn't ever worked anywhere on the planet, we're trying to become a socialist country. And as Millay pointed out, you don't have to own everything for it to be a socialist country if you control everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we talk about socialism, but it's actually closer to, and I hate to use the word because it's so loaded now, it's closer to fascism. And I
Yeah.
mean the original fascism, Franco's fascism, Italy's fascism, where it's, you control the culture and the economy through regulations. You don't control it directly, but it is direct, right? You pretend that it's not direct, but regulations are a direct control of the economy and the culture.
I mean, if somebody can point a gun to your head and throw you in jail and take money from you for failing to follow a regulation, then it's the same as ownership.
And now we have places in the UK. I heard an interesting thing. Last year, 400 people in Russia were officially arrested for violating speech online. But in the UK, it was 6,000 people who were arrested for violating speech laws online.
I wasn't aware of that.
And so it's crazy. Right now, are those numbers out of Russia correct? No. No, they're not. But it should be chilling that 6,000 people.
Sure, it wasn't 400 executed for it. It was 400 arrested for it.
It was. He said 400 were arrested last year for violating speech codes. Now, online speech codes. Now, maybe there's a technical there. If you're outside and you violate some speech code, it's different.
Well, people were arrested for attending
a funeral.
Arrested for attending ceremonies to pay respects and all the rest of that. For a political dissident. Yeah.
Well, because he's got to fight misinformation, right? It's the same deal that we're dealing with here. Like we talk next week about how governments are trying to fight.
What's interesting, one last bit, because I know we got to move on the extremism, is that what the lamestream press and the mainstream media is labeling extremism on the part of people on the right is what used to be known as patriotism and going to church. So, they've tried to label members of the Catholic Church as extremists because they belong to the Catholic Church. And they should probably remember that Joe Biden is a Catholic.
Yeah, well, they don't care about consistency. Come on now. Yeah. We know that these people don't care about consistency. If they did, they wouldn't be here. The hypocrisy and consistency. All right, we've got Mr. Richard Fields had an interesting thoughts on COVID. He actually had a bout of COVID.
He's finally caught COVID?
He finally caught a bout of COVID.
He is so late on this stuff. He's a late bloomer on COVID.
But apparently it
wasn't
such a big deal.
Yeah.
He said he never really stopped. Anyway, let's hear what Richard has to say about COVID and the COVID.
Love to hear Mr. Fields. Always like to hear
stuff.
This is Richard Fields with Report from the Fields. 5 days ago, I tested positive for COVID, in spite of taking the vaccine, actually a genetic modification treatment, that was supposed to be 95% effective. It wasn't. And guess what? Except for very, very mild cold symptoms, I am not sick. I've continued to do my daily 10,000 steps, 21 flights of stairs, and 125 minutes of intense exercise in the rain this last week. I know that my experience is anecdotal, not in any way representative of any average result, but it's a pretty strong anecdote. After all, I'm 76, in that elderly cohort most at risk from COVID. But my anecdotal evidence agrees with what I deduced from looking at mortality statistics when COVID first became a thing back in 2020. From its earliest days, COVID had a fatality rate only a bit higher than the 1968 Hong Kong flu. Hong Kong flu came and went. Most of us who were old enough to remember it don't. It was that inconsequential in the larger scheme of things. So should have been COVID. But it was not to be. In 2020, Dr. Anthony Fauci was the head of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Research. He had authorized U.S. money to be indirectly channeled to the Wuhan lab for research into gain-of-function research, that is, making viruses more virulent. It appears U.S. intelligence sources informed Fauci early on that COVID had come from the Wuhan lab, not the so-called wet market selling bats. So apparently, to cover his rear, Fauci did a 180-degree pivot on standard public health policy on pandemics and suggested to then President Trump the travel bans, lockdowns, people not having to work, social distancing, masking, etc. Trump jumped on the chance to appear heroic by doing something. Biden followed in his footsteps. The legacy media followed in lockstep. Dissenting voices on social media, mine included, were stifled by implicit government threats of greater regulation. The Federal Reserve and U.S. Treasury handed out free money to bandage over the economic problem that very little economic activity was going on. The result was supply chain shortages, inflation, a generation of kids missing 2 years of their education, increased deaths from people not able to access routine medical care, the list goes on. Finally, last Friday, the CDC came out with its latest COVID guidance, saying that you can pretty much treat it the same as you would treat the flu. Just in time for me to come out of isolation. But I'm still waiting for the mea culpa from the CDC and the politicians. I'm hearing crickets. And that's this week, Report from the Fields. See you next week.
So there it is. It's again, the centralized control fails, and reasonable people making rational choices for themselves wins. It's we pointed this out 4 years ago.
Was it 4 years ago
Yeah.
where we got together? We weren't allowed to come in here.
Right, we had to get
We were
learn how to do this
working
remotely.
and it was interesting. And the way my computer was set up made it a nightmare until I changed, the service I used to get to the internet. And we said at the beginning that all the stuff they're saying now, that we predicted the rampant inflation because of pumping money in. We said put kids back in school because they don't get sick from this stuff, and if they get sick from it, they don't die. We
talked about how the social fabric was going to, how this isolation was going to rip the social fabric apart.
All this stuff, especially the children. And we talked about something else which still isn't getting any play, and I want to bring it up. And that's the fact that a couple 100 million people around the planet, because there is, when Western economies sneeze, poor people on the planet get deathly ill because they're teetering on the edge anyway, and a lot of them, unfortunately, live in command economies and rely on us giving them food and medicine and all the rest of that. And when the economy tanks, they're the ones that suffer the most. And 200 million people pushed into the worst form of poverty, which is like less than $1.80 a day because of what we did to our own economy, means that probably in excess 30 million deaths amongst the most destitute on the planet. And that's not just bad policy, that's obscene. And people should face the firing squad for that.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, they're not going to,
No,
but they should.
They're not even going to have to face up to it. Is the real problem?
Yeah.
They're not even going to have to face it, and that's the whether they should face it, how much of a penalty they should pay is an open discussion. But they should at least have to face the reality, and they're not. Well, we're talking about facing reality. Governor Newsom's minimum wage exemption has faced some reality these last couple weeks, or last week, I suppose. It's apparently in this new fast food $20 an hour minimum wage, which why the government is picking out an industry and declaring what their wage should be is a different question. But they did, but they said essentially bakeries weren't.
If you baked and sold bread,
bake
and sell, can't just bake it, you gotta bake and sell it. You're exempt. You can continue to pay $16 an hour minimum wage, which we still don't know why that's there either. But certainly less unreasonable than 20. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but somehow Panera Bread was the only only fast food establishment that would qualify for this thing. Imagine that. And the guy who runs Panera Bread happens to be a big donor for Mr. Newsom.
And a buddy since high school.
A high school buddy. So, and they're saying, oh, we didn't have any talks. No, of course you're too smart to do. They're not dumb. They know that you have.
Yeah, they
lackeys
are.
do that.
We just let them get away with it.
Well, they know
These
they have
people are
lackeys do
idiots,
that, right? Yeah, someone is smart enough in those administrations so they have a lackey do it. So there's degrees of separation. But it doesn't mean it wasn't coordinated. It doesn't mean it wasn't done. Just because some lackey did it instead of them directly.
So all you got to do is have one little oven in your McDonald's, and so your special $10 loaf bread that it produces, nobody has to buy it. You just have to sell it, right? Or you sell it to
Well,
the
no, but
manager
it's just bread.
once a day.
But you can't, it's like Subway doesn't qualify, right? Subway
Why?
makes their own bread.
They make their own bread, and they sell it.
Yes, but they don't sell it as bread. They sell it as a sandwich.
It's pretty easy to start selling it as bread.
Yeah, but you're still selling. They wouldn't let you get away. Well, they wouldn't let anybody else get away with it. But
Yeah. Well,
Panera,
and Newsom came out and said that he doesn't think that Panera should qualify for this anyway. So he's stabbing his buddy in the back that gave him the big donation.
well, then his buddy had to come out and say, "Oh, we're going to pay the $20 anyway, even if though we're going to do it because
Because
so it
we
was
can
just-
afford to, because we get lots of never mind.
It is what it is. We're going to move on to talk about New York City rent regulations have hit TikTok, and apparently it's all a big kerfluffle now that people actually know about how the disastrous side effects of. I mean, so I suppose TikTok
And
has.
the inconsistencies and the fraud and on and on and on. Yeah, but Congress at this very minute is trying to make TikTok illegal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they might succeed. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a strange dance, isn't it? We have the First Amendment where we're allowed to speak our minds, but somehow we're not allowed to speak our minds on a platform that the politicians don't like.
Oh, it's Chinese, and Chinese are bad.
Well, yeah, they're stealing our data. But here's the thing: I'm far more concerned about our government having my data than I am about some marketing person.
Or even the Chinese government.
Even the Chinese government. What are they going to do? Don't do a double backflip into my house and what?
Double backflip. in a pike position. Yeah.
What are they going to do? Wag their finger at me? They can't do anything to
have
me.
a balloon go overhead with a sign on it that says, "James, you are bad."
Yeah, go for it. You know, it's like, I don't understand. But our government can put me in jail for essentially anything. They have an uncountable number of laws and regulations that they can dig through until they find something. If they really wanted to, they will find something.
And even if you actually don't commit a crime,
Yeah.
if you talk to another person about something that could be perceived as a crime, they can throw you in jail for conspiracy.
Yeah, so they will find something wrong if they want to.
Yeah.
So there was a couple weeks ago, there was an in vitro fertilization ruling out of Alabama it's being. One of the things that drove me crazy about this is it's being misrepresented to start with. And yet, yes, it's a complication, but there are people asking like it has something to do with regular birth control, and it's got nothing to do with regular birth control. What had happened was a clinic is attached to a hospital, and someone had left a secure door unsecured. A patient walked in, ended up destroying a couple vials of embryos, and the couple whose those embryos were wanted to sue the hospital for damages. But under Alabama law, they weren't allowed to sue the hospital for damages unless those vials were declared as children. And well, they should be allowed to sue for damages under this cause. Now, whether they should win or not, they should be allowed to sue.
Yeah.
And so that's really all this is about. But now it's become this whole big, huge thing about abortion rights and whatnot, when it really has nothing to do with this. And we are, as a country, are sophisticated enough. We know the difference between a murder of an unborn child, of a pregnant woman and the unborn child. We will convict those people for double murder, but yet somehow, in at least most of the country, you won't get convicted for an abortion, right? An abortion, in some places the provider may get in trouble for abortion, but the woman won't, right? If my memory of the
I think in some places that the woman will also get in trouble. But I'm sorry, the childbearing person, because I guess we can't use the word woman anymore. Huh?
Oh yeah, that's a whole nother another issue. But
Sorry, I just had to
yeah, I
drop
get you.
that in there. I'm bad. It's late. I'm a morning person. What can I say?
Yeah, well, the legislation had stalled, but then I think again, just before we came on today, I think I saw something about it passed, that they actually kind of got this thing where they're going to deal with this in an appropriate manner in the way it should be, right? They're going to try to protect these IVF, the clinics where they're going to try to protect them while at the same time allowing people who have been wronged to access the courts. I think, and that's ultimately the
Well,
right.
in this case, I mean, it's negligence on the part of this. This is whether it was an embryo or a South African Krugerrand. The people at the hospital are as part of the pact of civilization. When you're keeping something somewhere, they're required to keep it safe, and they didn't keep it safe. So why shouldn't people be able to sue the hospital for negligence of keeping a door open and letting some clown go in and destroy something, whatever they destroyed? And then why shouldn't that clown who went in there be liable for destroying somebody's property, no matter whose property it is?
Or what the property is in this particular case.
Huh?
It's not even necessarily about whose property, no matter what.
Yeah.
You should at least be allowed to take it to court, and rather than some goofy regulation, some goofy law.
But once
preventing it.
again, if it wasn't for the abortion issue, I don't think the Democrats would win an election anywhere.
Yeah, they are kind of hanging on to that, especially this year. That's kind of their only.
That's it.
It's the only thing they hang
That's
their
it.
hat
And
on.
I'm not saying that abortion should be illegal in all cases, or even most cases. It wasn't that long ago when we practiced infanticide in this country and got away with it. It wasn't that long ago in the history of civilization where children weren't even given a name until they were 1 year old, because very few made it to 1 year old. And there are still countries in the world now where baby girls are killed and after they come out of the womb, and because they're not as valuable economically to primitive societies as male children. So I'm not saying any of that stuff is good or right, but
abortion is a difficult issue because it's
tough. It's a
it,
tough
it
issue.
tramples on all kinds of various issues that we don't like to discuss.
Yeah.
And pregnancy by violence, and there's all kinds of things that we just simply don't like to discuss. But at some point we're going to have to discuss them like adults rather than like children.
Yeah.
And so we got a minute left, a minute and a half. So we're going to go. Chuck Todd has said it's time for acceptance of third-party failures. Now, as someone who kind of runs a third party, there's some truth to it, but it's not the way he means it. We as third parties have failed to do our job properly.
Right.
But
Agreed.
But at the same time, the process is rigged against us.
Yeah, I mean, if you think it isn't rigged, look how hard it is to get on a ballot anywhere as libertarian.
Yeah.
Look how impossible it is to get on a debate somewhere as libertarian, and much less third party. But then again, Ross Perot, there's plenty of time. At this point in time, in his third party candidacy, just basically started his campaign. And he took, what, 20-something% of the vote?
Yeah.
Big chunk of the vote.
So if there's someone who could do that,
Yeah.
I don't see anybody on the horizon who could pull that kind of thing
Well,
off.
an awful lot of people are starting to believe the hogwash that JFK's pushing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we shall see what happens, John. But I do think we as third parties have failed, but we've also been set up to fail.
Oh, yeah.
So
I
thank you
agree.
for joining us tonight. John, thank you for joining me. Thank you for working hard inside the control room. And thank you for watching. Have a good night. And please remember to love everybody.
What he said. Yeah.